Yes. Yeah, that was a very long time ago. The Mississippi Register. Small diocesan newspaper. But for a 30-year-old pastor, it was a big responsibility. Too much at times.
James, we don't talk, okay? You're friends with monsters. Get the
sexually abusing his 5-year-old nephew.
A former Roman Catholic priest was ultimately convicted and sent to prison for molesting children over a period lasting.
When you're a poor kid from a poor family, religion counts for a lot. And when a priest pays attention to you, it's a big deal. How do you say no to God, right?
It's the 2000s. You're part of the Spotlight team, the oldest continuously operating newspaper investigative journalist unit in the United States. Your new managing editor, who is Jewish, tells your team to go deeper in the story you've covered in the past regarding a priest sexually abusing a child and the church sweeping it under the rug. Remember, it's the 2000s. People of the church held such a high status in society, especially in Boston, where in 2018, there's an estimate of 45.2% of the population, close to 1.9 million, out of the 4,269,730 people in Boston were Catholics. Doing so will be career suicide, even worse if you're a Christian yourself, but you understand that this is one of the many risks and sacrifices journalists make day to day on the job. And this story will be no different than the others you've covered in the past. No other news organizations is interested in covering this story. You think to yourself, is this really a story worth going deep for? With everyone but my colleagues and the abused against me, would anyone care about a few priest molestation charges the church swept under the rug? Well, of course it's worth it. And no, it's not just a few cases. There are a lot more, dating all the way back to 19... Okay, I did that to set the mood, but continuing, in the early 80s, many cases of priests sexually abusing children have been brought to the public eye. Not to say it only happened recently, they've been happening even further back, but it was at this decade that when some cases finally arose. Some of these priests were prosecuted, even fewer faced the consequences, and even if they were not put in jail. And these cases were kept away from the spotlight, which is ironic when considering the movie I will be talking about in this video. Spotlight, which came out on 3rd of September 2015, is an American biographical drama film directed by Tom McCarthy and written by McCarthy and Josh Singer, loosely based on the series of stories by the Spotlight team that earned the Globe the 2003 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. The plot follows a group of investigative journalists covering a story in the early 2000s regarding the church as an institution covering up multiple accounts of sexual abuse cases committed by the priests over the last century, which they did publish early 2002, hence the Pulitzer Prize. I find this film fascinating as throughout the movie it highlights many issues with journalism that existed then and still does today. I won't be focusing on every scene in the movie though, as I have a few other essays to write this week. And this is about as much effort as I'm willing to commit to myself in a 5-minute video, so I will narrow it down to a few scenes. 1 hour and 5 minutes into the movie, there's a scene where one of the journalists named Matt Carroll, whilst cross-referencing between a list of priests and transfers between parishes and their specific reasons, finds out that priests involved in these sexual abuse cases have been moved into facilities called a treatment center. These so-called treatment centers, upon further investigations, turned out to be regular houses within neighborhoods. Matt Carroll finds out to his horror that a priest who was accused of sexual abuse has been moved into a treatment center near his house, coincidentally right around the corner. Because of this, Matt decides to go back home and write a note for his kids, a warning to not go near the house. An hour and 12 minutes in, Matt talks to the head of the journalist investigation team, Walter Robinson. Although the investigative work is confidential, asks if he could at least warn people in this neighborhood about the existence of a treatment center within. Unfortunately, Walter says no. There is a conflict between his obligation as a journalist and as a human. He knows it is morally right to make sure the people within his neighborhood are safe, but at the same time, there is a risk that if this information is leaked, other news organizations might catch on and start working on the story, which is another issue in journalism. There is a very delicate balance, a choice that many news organizations struggle with, to publish fast news or accurate news. Although it is better for consumers to receive valid and accurate information, the first news organization to report on an issue will be the one to receive credit. This issue kind of reminds me of something like a SpongeBob episode. In the episode The Krabby Chronicles, SpongeBob is forced to get into investigative journalism by his boss, Mr. Krabs. Starting out, there's no interesting news, as the town they live in, Bikini Bottom, is a fairly small and mundane place of residence, until SpongeBob gets the idea to take a picture of his best friend Patrick standing next to a lamppost and bases his next headline on a somewhat funny lie, which is "Man gets married to a lamppost." Although out of the ordinary, such a headline was not enough to pull in readers, so SpongeBob is encouraged to get out there and dig for more news. He comes across a bodybuilder acquaintance and takes a picture of him seemingly getting punched in the gut by a man and frames it as being defeated by a smaller man, tarnishing his reputation and getting him kicked out of the local gym. However, SpongeBob is rewarded with praise by his boss and for making a headline that interests a bunch of new readers, further pushing him to make outlandish, fake, taken out of context headline to attract more people and get more money, even if it means ruining other people's reputation. Eventually, the public finds out about how SpongeBob is being mistreated by his boss, and the show ends on a good note and a moral, as all kids' shows episodes do. 20 minutes in, another journalist from the team named Michael Resendez meets up for the first time with a lawyer named Mitchell Garabedian, who charged the Cardinal Bernard Law, the Archbishop of Boston, for knowing about Giggin's sexual abuse of children and doing nothing to stop it. Mitchell explains to Michael how he tried to take the Cardinal to court. However, the charges against him failed to stick, as the church put a lot of effort trying to put down or disbar Mitchell and is trying to keep a close eye on him. 30 minutes in, Marty Barron, Spotlight's new managing editor, decides to pay Cardinal Bernard Francis Law a visit to see what the Cardinal has to say about the priests or the cases of sexual abuse that the church decided to handle privately. After a long-winded conversation, the conversation ends with the priest giving Marty a particular book, which the priest calls A Guide to Boston, but the book is actually called Catholic Church Catechism, which is a summary of an instructional book for youths and adults alike who are interested in learning how to get into Christianity or wants to understand what Christians believe in. The Cardinal is inadvertently trying to dissuade Marty and his team from investigating any further into the matter, as this is against the interest of the church as an institution. This happens more than once in the movie, where the team is discouraged from continuing the investigation, such as 55 minutes in, when Marty attends a Catholic Charities Gala. Meeting with a number of other priests from other different parishes, he takes the opportunity to coax more information out of the others in hopes of one of them slipping up and revealing sensitive information. Coincidentally, he runs into Walter, who was invited by his priest friends when he had attended Boston College High. Then we start following Walter, who runs into Jim Sullivan, an attorney representing the church. After a while, getting nothing out of Jim, Walter is told, "This is the church you're talking about, Robbie," as if it's common knowledge to not go against the church. Since investigative journalism tends to get invasive and sometimes encroaches on certain institution or organization's interests, they will do anything they can within their power to prevent being exposed. This also applies to organized crime. At a point later near the end of the movie, Robbie is seen at a bar, supposedly waiting to meet someone when, incidentally, Jim arrives to greet Robbie. Apparently, the man who Robbie is supposed to meet couldn't make it, so he sent Jim in his place instead. Again, instead of getting any information, Jim tries to get Robbie to stop investigating any further. In the movie, the means to prohibit investigative journalists from proceeding is not as violent or threatening as it seems, but is very different in real life, and certain groups do not abide by the law and outright have ways to ignore or get around it. An example can be taken from a few readings such as the UNESCO 2017, Mitra Hoibi and Garrido 2021, and Mitra 2020. All these readings provide insights into the broader challenges and threats faced by journalists and media professionals, particularly those working in high-risk environments or in areas where press freedom is restricted. While these readings may not directly relate to the specific issues raised in the movie Spotlight, they do highlight some of the broader issues and themes in journalism that the movie touches upon, highlighting the importance of investigative journalism in uncovering stories of public interest and the need for journalists to be vigilant about their personal safety and security, while also emphasizing the role of media ethics and professional standards in guiding the conduct of journalists. Finally, on our last point, we'll be talking about the very touchy topic, investigative journalism, ethics. Of course, the public wants to know what's going on with big corporations or the rich or whichever major group, organized or criminal, has influence over their lives in political, economical, financial, physical, or any literal sense there is. However, there needs to be boundaries set on how investigative journalists go about getting information. There's this pesky thing people have called rights, and generally speaking, people have rights to privacy, even says so on the Australian government website. That being said, to gain information by unlawfully or unethically accessing private information is wrong and can be punished with jail time or worse. The movie tackles this issue with an arc of scenes between Michael Resendez and Garabedian. At some point in the movie, Michael Resendez talks and convinces Garabedian to allow him to speak to some of the witnesses that Garabedian has talked to in regards to his trial against the Cardinal back in the old days. And there are a bunch of scenes where you get to see the victims being apprehensive and hesitant towards answering, as this is a personal part of their lives. There's a very specific part of ethical journalism where you have to respect people's privacy, as in, although news is important, human rights is also equally as important. But ethics in journalism doesn't just end at talking about people's personal and private issues. Bringing in examples from outside of the movie, there have been instances where investigative journalists have violated ethical standards in their pursuit of a story. One such case involves Janet Cook, a former reporter for the Washington Post who won the Pulitzer Prize for her article Jimmy's World that recounted the life of an 8-year-old heroin addict in Washington, D.C. However, it was later revealed that the story was entirely fabricated and Cook had never met the child. The scandal led to Cook's termination and the Washington Post returning the Pulitzer Prize. The case is often cited as an example of the risk of prioritizing sensationalism over accuracy and truthfulness in journalism. Media ethics and professional standards are critical components of responsible and effective journalism, as highlighted in several of the readings. The United National Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, the UNESCO, emphasizes the importance of ethical principles in the Safety Guide for Journalists, a handbook for reporters in high-risk environments, stating that journalists must adhere to the highest ethical standards in order to build trust with the public, avoid legal and professional sanctions, and protect themselves from harm. UNESCO 2017, page 13. Similarly, Gawk 2015 argues that the Fourth Estate functions best when its members adhere to ethical principles that guide their professional conduct, page 44. Additionally, Miller 2020 notes that ethical principles can play a role in mitigating the risk of harm to journalists, stating that journalists can benefit from training in ethical principles, including those related to avoid conflicts of interest, maintaining confidentiality, and minimizing harm to sources and subjects, page 228. These readings highlight the importance of adhering to ethical principles in journalism in order to maintain public trust and credibility, avoid harm to oneself and others, and fulfill the critical role of informing the public and holding those in power accountable. That's all the time I have for this video. Thank you for listening, and I hope you give me high distinction. Please, man, I'm pretty tired. I need something to make this world